Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Heinrich, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the state of the bulk power system. I'm Dr. Liza Reed, the Director of Climate and Energy Policy at Niskanen Center. For over a decade, my work has focused on the challenges of building a transmission backbone to deliver reliable and affordable energy across the country. Transmission moves electricity from where it's generated to where it's consumed and allows regions to share power with one another. It is this that is essential to reliability, resilience, and affordability. The United States is entering a period of rapid load growth, driven by data centers, advanced manufacturing, and electrification. We are building a more diverse set of energy resources at the same time: gas, nuclear, wind, solar, geothermal, and storage, but no single resource is sufficient on its own. Reliability depends on how these resources work together, and transmission is what allows that coordination to happen and ensures that every American has access to that affordable power. Right now, our system is not built to do that well. Our electricity system is broken into regional grids with limited ability to transfer power between them. The consequences of those constraints are already clear. During recent winter storms, we have repeatedly seen one region have excess power while another faced shortages and extremely high prices. A Niskanen Center and Grid Strategies analysis of how the grid performed during Winter Storm Fern found that across the Southwest, Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic regions, wind power produced at more than twice the expected level, while coal, solar, and natural gas all produced less power than expected. These reliability risks translate to real costs for consumers. Consumers experienced price differences of hundreds of dollars between neighboring regions, including negative power prices, indicating there was power not being used at all because the transmission was not available to move it to where it was needed. Transmission between regions could have captured nearly $200 million in savings during that one storm alone. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC, the entity that Congress and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission look to for reliability assessments, determined last year that it would be prudent to add 35 gigawatts of interregional transmission to the system to increase reliability. That's a 40% increase on our current capabilities to move power. Interregional transmission lines are in the national public interest because of these affordability and reliability benefits that they provide. Yet they face much higher siting and permitting barriers than other energy infrastructure because the authority to approve interstate projects still rests largely with the states or even sometimes counties. Existing market structures also create unnecessary barriers to new technologies. For example, high voltage direct current transmission technology. Grid operators do not allow this HVDC technology to be compensated for the grid services they provide that provide reliability and balancing, even though they pay generators and other grid participants for those functions. Our inability to grow and unwillingness to adapt is impacting American competitiveness. China has built tens of thousands of miles of high-capacity transmission in the last 2 decades to our hundreds, and has adopted this modern high-voltage direct current system to move power long distances. We are behind on increasing capacity. We are behind on adopting modern technology, and this will put us behind on attracting and maintaining top industries. A shortage of grid capacity is the primary barrier to cost-effective and swift deployment of AI in this country. The data center infrastructure can go anywhere it gets power. It does not have to be here in the US, and it will not be if we cannot deliver a dominant grid. We need a narrow and clear federal authority to build interregional transmission. We need to remove market barriers to advanced technologies to get more grid-enhancing technologies and high-voltage direct current systems online to move power efficiently in our system. Congress can deliver a grid that grows the economy, that provides affordable energy, and that demonstrates America's competitive edge. The next industry can be built anywhere there are electrons. Let's make sure it's right here in the United States. Thank you very much.
Do any of you think that we're building, and obviously I think the affordability argument is well received by everyone on this committee because all of us have constituents who are under pressure. But do any of you think that we are building enough interregional transmission to service the existing grid and the kind of growth that we would hope for both the electric sector and the economy?
We are not building the amount of interregional transmission that we need right now, and there are particular barriers that are preventing that from happening. Utilities are not incentivized or even expected to be looking to their neighbors, and so we are losing the economies of scale, and that is costing consumer purses.
Dr. Reed, go a little deeper. You talked about how to capture value for customers, how to save them money as opposed to just bring additional costs onto the rate base. Go a little deeper into how we can capture that value and actually benefit customers.
Thank you, Senator. I'm happy to. What is causing us to lose this value for consumers is that we are not building the transmission. We have seen a number of economic analyses that find that, on average, $100 million is lost per gigawatt of transmission line that was not built per year in the last 10 years. These transmission lines are not being built for a handful of reasons. One is that they are very complicated. This is an interstate and interregional project, and it does not enjoy a federal siting and permitting authority as natural gas pipelines do. These electrons are moving or intended to move in interstate commerce, and instead they are being held up by processes at the individual states requiring approval. This is duplicative red tape that discourages developers and makes it longer for them to be able to complete these projects. There are also not expectations at utilities to be looking to the regions to build these interregional lines. We have an opportunity to enable both utilities and private merchant developers who would not show up on a customer's utility bill to build more if we can fix these regulations.
To your point, I was deeply involved in facilitating and working on one interregional power line, and it took 17 years to get all of the approvals to actually make that a reality. I think there are a number of places where our incentives are not aligned. You mentioned the issue of compensation for some of the values that those power lines provide. Walk through that a little bit, because obviously I think there's a mismatch between transmission and generation.
Yeah, I'm happy to, Senator. Thank you. High voltage direct current was the topic of my PhD thesis. I don't think I can cover that in a minute, but I will note that it is a semiconductor-based technology that has the ability to act differently than our existing grid system. So it provides an excellent backbone because it provides different services and different values. It can move power long distances, which captures a value for consumers. But the way that it controls electrons also provides stability to the grid. There's complicated reasons involving voltage and frequency that we can discuss offline, but HVDC ensures that we are keeping electric equipment online by keeping the voltage and frequency where it needs to be.
One of the tools that has been used very effectively in other parts of the world and sporadically here in the U.S. are grid enhancing technologies. But we have this model, particularly within state-regulated utilities, where the incentive is often, the responsible parties, my utility as an example in central New Mexico, is really leaned into GETS. But there's also an incentive for utilities to build big and then get rate-based. How do we create a more aligned incentive with GETS so that we can get more out of the existing grid?
Thank you, Senator. There are a number of options that Congress and FERC can pursue to incentivize more of these grid-enhancing technologies, and part of it is expectation. What are we requiring of the grid? We should be using the lines that we build to a higher capacity. Grid-enhancing technologies through dynamic line rating, power flow control, All of these can help us use those lines better and move the power around. And the way that we set expectations on how reliability is achieved and provide financial incentives to utilities or private developers to provide those services are ways that we can get more of this advanced technology incorporated.
My first question is for Dr. Reed. If we built out the backbone of an interregional high voltage DC transmission line over the next couple of decades, what would be some of the benefits in terms of ratepayer bills, reliability, particularly during extreme weather events? If you can touch on that and any other technical benefits that you want to highlight.
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and I'm happy to discuss the benefits of high voltage direct current because this need for a backbone to our alternating current system is particularly clear when we see severe weather, such as winter storms and even extreme heat, because HVDC can dispatch power long distances very quickly and directionally. In our alternating current system, electrons flow where there is the least resistance. HVDC can move it exactly where it needs to go, and so it works very well with that alternating current system to move around congestion and provide economic power. Where you have excess power, you can move it to an area that needs power while also providing reliability benefits. There's tremendous opportunity for building this type of transmission, particularly across regional lines, for economic and reliability reasons that will ultimately save hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Are there any key regulatory or procedural barriers that you think are holding us back?
Thank you, Senator. There are very specific barriers that are holding us back from adopting HVDC technology. One of them is the siting constraints on interstate and interregional transmission lines. These types of lines face the most number of siting and permitting barriers because even though they are participating in interstate commerce, they are subject to the specific rules and regulations of each state individually. That's an incredible burden for a utility or a merchant developer to take on that risk and that timeline to complete. We also we do not have the expectation in markets. FERC has not set the expectation that these technologies can receive compensation for the benefits that they provide. They are providing the same benefits. They are built on the same semiconductor technology of the products that we do allow to be remunerated in the markets.
Dr. Reed, let me start with you. As you pointed out in your testimony, we are struggling to build the transmission lines necessary to keep pace with the surging growth and, electric vehicles. You look at all the different places where we're needing more and more advanced manufacturing, all these places where we need more electricity. The U.S. is only building 375 miles a year of new grid, while China is building whatever is 8,000 or slightly over 8,000 miles. We're also falling behind our European partners when it comes to deploying the advanced technologies that you have all been talking about, dynamic line ratings, advanced conductors, et cetera. So start with you, Dr. Reed. Can you talk about the need to have a holistic view of grid modernization that includes both new transmission and improvements to our existing infrastructure?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm happy to discuss the multiple ways that we can bring new technology and new developers into the grid system to provide reliability and affordability. I'll start with grid-enhancing technologies and reconductoring. These are opportunities to use the lines that we already have, the towers that we already have, the rights of way that we already have, and get more power through them. That's more value to consumers because it's a less cost effort for moving more power. It is a shorter-term solution that also buys time for building these larger interregional transmission lines, which are essential for providing long-term reliability and affordability by sharing power between regions.
Yesterday, Senators Murkowski, Shaheen, and we introduced a piece of legislation called the Secure Grid Act. The legislation would empower states to really assess the risks to their electric grids, including extreme weather, cyber threats, and other vulnerabilities. So I want to ask the panelists, and maybe Dr. Reed, I'll start with you. How should the U.S. and the states work to reduce the risk of cyber and physical attacks on the grid?
Senator, thank you for the question. I don't want to speak outside my expertise on cybersecurity in particular, but I will speak to overall security as a reliability metric and providing more interregional transmission, removing these regulations that make it difficult to build interregional and build HVDC is a security metric because we are able to move power and isolate parts of the grid if they are under attack. There's tremendous opportunity in these new technologies and new transmission if we can build it.
There's been a lot of discussion this morning about new technologies and more transparency in the interconnection queue process that would really better allow all energy sources to hook up to the grid faster. Let me ask Dr. Reed, maybe start with you or any of the panelists. Are there certain RTOs or regions of the country that you believe are taking an innovative approach to queue management that we should be thinking of or using up or lifting up as a model? I'm curious.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I'll speak to the Southwest Power Pool, and I believe Mr. Fisher can speak to this as well. So the Southwest Power Pool is looking at transmission planning, including the interconnection queue and broader transmission planning as a holistic solution. That, I think, has the opportunity to be looking to build more of these high-capacity lines so that we can provide reliability and move power cost-effectively at the same time. We have seen in interconnection queues, even when different RTOs take on solutions where they are moving different types of technology or different generators to the front of the line, we still see that regardless of how long the study process takes, which does need fixing, there's still the build process afterwards, which inevitably says we need billions of dollars of transmission that we didn't build and now we need to so that we can get this energy online of all types.
Yeah.
Tell me if you would, because you've been helpful to us in terms of working through some of the aspects of this, what your thoughts would be on our bill.
Senator, thank you for the question. I don't have any specific thoughts on the bill you refer to in particular, but I can speak to wildfire resilience and the importance of investing in wildfire resilience and investing in a grid that can be resilient to numerous concerns, particular and including wildfires. There are aspects of that resilience which are difficult to put on a ratepayer because of the small, often rural utility footprint that would then have to pay for it. And there are different mechanisms that I think could be effective for covering those costs. And I think it's really important.
Aren't these small utilities, which you described correctly as the footprints that you're seeing, aren't they really getting clobbered by the circumstances we're seeing right now?
Wildfires are an incredibly important risk to be addressing. I also want to highlight the value that transmission can provide in wildfire mitigation by being able to move power away from where areas are at extreme risk and route power in different ways so that consumers can still be served while the risk itself can be mitigated.
Dr. Reed, you mentioned that wildfire resilience is a very important aspect of the grid, and knowing that what happened on Maui, which was a massive wildfire and all of that, can you give me an example of how a grid can be made wildfire resilient?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I am not a resilience expert in particular when it comes to wildfires. I can speak to how transmission can provide resilience, particularly this type of backbone transmission that can move power around so that consumers are still served with electrons they need while isolating areas of the grid or particular lines that could be of high risk of wildfires.
So do you know if power companies are adopting some of those kinds of suggestions so that they can provide power while the wildfire is occurring and parts of the grid is shut down?
I'm sorry, I can't speak to any particular power company.
When you mentioned about the wildfire resilience, that certainly caught my attention, but I do have a question for you. Over 100,000 people in Hawaii recently lost power due to a severe storm that caused widespread damage and down power lines across the islands. And of course, Hawaii cannot rely on power from other states during these instances. What are some of the grid technologies that could be most helpful for increasing the affordability and reliability of power in Hawaii, Alaska, and other remote locations?
Senator, thank you for the question. It allows me the opportunity to talk about high voltage direct current and the ways that this particular technology can be used to restart a grid. So when there are blackouts, these sort of advanced technologies and innovations, if we bring them more onto the grid, then we find it easier and faster to restart a grid after there is a blackout, and to manage the grid itself, the voltage and the flexibility that can cause blackouts so that we don't have blackouts in the first place. So we need more of this advanced and innovative technology incorporated into the grid and building a backbone of a grid so that we can recover.
And is incorporating this kind of technology into the grid an expensive proposition that is going to result in the ratepayers having to pay a lot more? Because Hawaii ratepayers pay the most for electricity of any state in the country.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I can't speak specifically to the costs borne by Hawaiians, but I can speak to what we have seen in studies by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, national labs, and private analysis that interregional transmission and advanced technologies save consumers money by investing in the right kinds of transmission infrastructure that we need to
In the
move
long
power
run.
affordably.
Thank you. Now, the cost of utility scale battery storage has fallen dramatically, 27% in 2025, according to a recent estimate from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. And Dr. Reed, what role can battery storage play to reduce transmission bottlenecks and reduce the overall cost of power paid by customers? And also, do you think that state and federal regulators should require data centers, which are massive users of energy, to incorporate energy storage to reduce their impact on the grid?
Senator, thank you for the question, and I'd welcome the opportunity to work with your office on the specifics of energy storage. I can speak to the need for more generation and more power on the grid, and energy storage is a valuable way to provide flexibility in the same way that transmission provides flexibility in moving power over time and over distance. As far as the data center question, I think it's important when we talk about what data centers need and what industry needs to provide options. And the best options are solutions that let the market decide what works best. But one of those options has to be reliable and affordable energy on the grid. If we set expectations of exclusively bringing your own power, then we are telling industries you must be able to adopt high cost and high risk choices to thrive in the American economy. If we provide options, that gives markets and the ability to develop and compete in the U.S. and thrive.
Final, Ms. Reed, we talked a lot about direct current, and you seem to know a lot about that. DC lines are also less line losses, isn't that correct?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. DC has a number of efficiencies, including lower line losses because of how the current flows on the line.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I agree with both of my fellow witnesses that optionality is the key here, and that if we can provide a reliable, affordable grid, that should be one of the options for growing industry competitively and providing affordable electricity for consumers. And that
Let me go
grid
back
can
to,
be
because I
built
think
by
this is the
private
rub.
developers.
This is the rub, in which does the federal government have a backstop in terms of regulation in which you get electrons from Texas to Atlanta? You follow what I'm saying? And so I think everything else we agree on. And the Meta Center in Northeast Louisiana, which is, I think, the size of Manhattan, has all these different ways simultaneously by which to provide electricity. Except that I don't think it's bringing electrons from the panhandle of Texas. So how would y'all resolve that?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I think a clear and narrow federal authority for siting interstate transmission lines would be consistent with how we site natural gas pipelines, and that interstate commerce is a necessary and narrow role for the federal government. Right now, states use their eminent domain authority, but they also use practices that reduce competition so that we cannot have private developers who are able to access the economic power and move between states. So we have multiple state regulations and laws in many places that are suppressing competition in ways that are costly to the consumer. And a narrow federal authority could help clarify this.
Senator Heinrich.
Dr. Reed, if each one of these large load data centers was its own generator, would that be the most efficient use of capital to power that part of the demand sector?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think the most efficient use of capital to power data centers is the choice of the data centers themselves. And I think the best option that we can provide for American competitiveness and for growing industries here is to ensure that they have those options available to them, both a robust grid that can provide reliable and affordable power and options for building their own private grids to provide their own power.
And describe to me any risk associated with customer impact with the sort of private grid model.
Thank you for the question. I think the way that we think about transmission benefits is important to consider here, where if we have a robust backbone to our grid that can provide affordable power, that benefits consumers. The more consumers of electricity that there are on the grid, including high consumers such as data centers, there would be more ratepayers who are helping pay for that valuable infrastructure.
People don't like having pipelines or, grids, transmission lines coming across their property. So we look at reform within our entire permitting process, recognizing that the public comes first. They've got to have full transparency. They've got to have the right to speak their mind. But ultimately, some of these decisions are going to affect a much larger whole and are going to require very difficult decisions. And I think that's one of the challenges when we look at the grid. How do we get to that? I mean, putting lines underground is prohibitively expensive in most situations. Similar with pipelines, it's hard to put them deep underground. What do each of you, or how would you provide an opinion in terms of how to approach this? Because that's going to be the question we're all going to deal with. We might not get you up here to testify again, but I would love to, while we've got you, hear your opinion.
I agree that we need a single process. I think a clear, narrow federal authority for the types of transmission that are providing interstate and interregional value to consumers is incredibly necessary. What we have right now, we've talked about many different types of permitting, and transmission experiences this level of iteration on the state level and on the federal level, and we have an opportunity here. Congress has an opportunity to clarify and narrow this iteration that is happening by limiting the number of federal actions that need to be taken, by identifying clearly if it is a state or federal decision that needs to be made in the interstate flow of electrons, just as we do in the interstate flow of natural gas, and an opportunity to open up transmission development to private developers who are ready to capture that value and bring it to consumers, but are barred from that by both state regulations and complicated federal restrictions.